This is why I reference back to history and showed in 1918 the United States escaped the consequences of the first great pandemic, the Spanish flu. Now that it had passed a century, we now know that the H1N1 virus originated in Kansas and spread by the U.S. Army onto Europe. There were no qualms about wittingly or unwittingly exposing the agenda of the West. Blame Wuhan as the genesis of the pandemic and make it pay for global indemnification, the fastest way for China's economy to collapse. Well, history repeats itself, but instead of moving forward, I would move you backwards in time to check milestones. December 31, 2019, the first confirmation that the coronavirus had broken out in Wuhan as the ground zero. 1 month before, November 29, 2009, testifying in May 2020, the mayor of Belleville, New Jersey, Michael Melham, said he had tested positive for coronavirus antibodies. But when did he get sick? He contracted the virus in November 2019, or 2 months before the U.S. confirmed its first case. October 13 to 18, 2019, over 200 American servicemen participated in the World Military Games held of all places in Wuhan, China, with most of the services billeted near a hotel with few hundred meters from a seafood market. There were reports of at least 5 of them being hospitalized after many suddenly fell ill with some kind of virus. Known to be always on top 5 of any world competition, the entire U.S. team uncharacteristically ranked 40th, 40, in the team standings. August 2019, Fort Detrick, the U.S. largest weapon factory located in Frederick, Maryland, USA, was officially closed. Why? The answer is in July 2019. The Centers for Disease Control issued Fort Detrick a cease and desist order 3 days after it first sent a letter of concern. Then finally, June 30, 2019, an outbreak in the Springfield Village, a retirement community for seniors located in Fairfax County, Northern Virginia, USA, hospitalized 54 and caused the death of 3. This is my earliest confirmation of a severe respiratory disease outbreak. I am, of course, not a virologist nor a medical practitioner, but my common sense tells me the viral transmission that occurred in Wuhan was not a lab leak, neither by zoonosis or animal-to-human infection, as corroborated by 2 formal investigations of the World Health Organization. It got to Wuhan, China, through anthroponosis or human-to-human transmission. Note that since COVID-19 virus incubates from 10 to 14 days before showing emergency-level symptoms, this meant that the U.S. servicemen who went to Wuhan on October 2019 could not have contracted the virus in Wuhan. The more plausible explanation is they already had the viral infection when they left the United States and before entering China's borders. My final corroboration is the video of a House Congressional Oversight and Reform Committee hearing held sometime in the March of 2020 at Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Here is the brief transcript of the C-SPAN video of the sworn-in statement of CDC Director General Robert Redfield in response to questions by Congressman Harley Ruda, then California's 48th District Representative. Ruda, and if somebody died from influenza, are we doing post-mortem testing to see whether it was influenza or whether it was COVID-19? Redfield, there is a surveillance team of death from pneumonia that CDC has It is not in every city, every state, and every hospital. Rather, so we could have people in the United States dying for what appears to be influenza when in fact it could be coronavirus or COVID-19. Redfield. Some cases have actually been diagnosed that way in the United States today. That was March of 2020. Redfield confirmed on live video that some 14,000 to 20,000 Americans who died of influenza in the U.S. were attributed to flu, but after autopsy were posthumously discovered and diagnosed as COVID before China confirmed its first outbreak at Wuhan on December 31, 2019. Today, as we speak, but not anymore covered by my book, we find that a Dr. Ralph Stephen Barrett, professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, USA, has been in deep research on the coronaviruses for the past 30 years. But this is going ahead of a sequel I'm intending to write for the future. In closing, I would like to quote an American, the Special Forces Colonel Doug McGregor, former senior advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller. Quote, over the past 2 decades, the U.S. has been blocking the establishment of a verification regime to the Biological Weapons Convention and refused to accept inspection in the biological facilities within and without its borders. The move has further aggravated the concern of the international community. We once again ask the U.S. to provide a full clarification of its biomilitarization activities within and without its borders and accept multilateral verification. Now we have gone a full circle. The bioweapon discussion has shifted to Ukraine, and for good reason. Thank you and good afternoon to all.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you kay Ka-Ado Paglinawan for his opening statement. Bago si Kalyobi mag-opening statement, sabi nung isang tao dito, mag-picture daw tayo kahit for few seconds. Picture lang daw. May nag-request dito na picture daw. Picture tayo sa ano? Pwedeng may photographer daw mag-picture daw. Photo op muna. Smile for the camera.
Smile. Smile pala.
Thank you very much. Next, we'd like to invite for his opening statement. Si Carlo B. Guzman is very historic kasi what he's doing is he is the first socialist labor leader in Philippine history running for president. Unlike in South America, we have many socialist presidents. Siya ang the first to run in the Philippines. He is now the candidate for president of Partido Lakas ng Masa, and he is the chairperson of the Labor Federation called Bukluran ng Manggagawang Pilipino or BMP. Na-notice ng maraming media and mga analysts, among the presidential candidates, he is one of the few that has, aside from Undersecretary here, he is for non-aligned and independent status for Philippine foreign policy, which is actually pro-Philippines, not pro any superpower. Let us welcome Kalyobi de Guzman for his opening statement. Kamusta kayo and what are your views about what's happening in the world?
Hello? Meron? Okay. Wilson, maraming salamat muli sa iyong pag-iimbita sa akin sa araw na ito. Maraming salamat sa ating mga kapatid na media. Ganoon din, maraming salamat. Malapit na yung eleksyon. 38 days na lang. 38 days na lang at tayo magpapasya. Pero ang ibig sabihin din nun, meron pa tayong 38 days para magmuni-muni at magkampanya doon sa ating mga kapitbahay, sa ating mga kamag-anak, kaibigan at kaklase para ipalam kung ano yung ating analysis or patuloy pa tayong mag-aral sa kung sino yung dapat na iboto. Sa party ko ay tumakbo ko dahil gusto kong isulong talaga yung interest ng masang Pilipino, lalong higit yung mga manggagawa at ng ating mga magsasaka. Dahil sa mahabang panahon ng eleksyon sa ating bansa ay dominado o monopolize ng mga elite, ng mga sikat, ng mga bilyonaryo na suportado ng malalaking korporasyon sa ating bansa. At pagkakatapos natin ng halalan, walang nababago sa buhay ng masang Pilipino dahil ang mga batas at patakarang ginagawa ay pabor sa mga mayayaman, sa mga malaking korporasyon, sa malaking kapitalista sa ating bansa. Kaya naman, naging legal ang pagyaman ng mga mayayaman at naging legal din sa ating bansa ang paghihirap ng milyon-milyon nating mga mamayan. Yan ang history at kasaysayan ng eleksyon sa ating bansa. Matatalino naman yung ating naihahalal, magagaling, magaganda ang pangako, pero ang problema, pagkakatapos ng eleksyon, yung presyo ng bigas, hindi ma-resolve. Ang daming sinasabi na nagawa, ang daming sinasabi na nagawang batas, na ipatayong mga kalsada, na ipagawang tulay, mga airport na state of the art na mga airport ang naipapagawa, at kung ano-anong mga pasikat ang sinasabi ng kailang mga performance pagkatapos ng kailang termino. Pero ang problema, lahat sila, mula kay Marcos, kay Cory, kay Nonoy, hanggang dito kay Duterte, yung presyo ng bigas na siyang problema ng mga mamayan, hindi nila mapababa. Presyo ng kuryente, pagpapa-hospital, pagpapaaral, ay hindi nila ma-resolve. Kaya ako ay nagkaroon ng kapangasang tumakbo dahil diyan. Gusto kong i-break yung kulturang sa eleksyon na puro mayayaman, puro bilyonaryo na lamang at sikat ang tumatakbo. Kaya ako yung kauna-unahan, tama si Wilson. Ako yung kauna-unahang kandidato sa pagkapangulo na mula sa hanay ng mga manggagawa, mula sa hanay ng mga maralita, ng mga magsasaka. Ako yon. Wala, since Aguinaldo, walang tumakbo niyan. Kaya naman, since Aguinaldo hanggang ngayon, dahil puro mayayaman din lang ang pinapaboran. Ang gusto ko, may break yon, ma-break. At ang makinabang sa bansang Pilipinas ay ang mamayang Pilipino, hindi ang mga bilyonaryo. Yun ang aking pangarap kung bakit ako tumakbo. At para magawa yan, i-strong ka lahat yung mga batas na nagli-legalize ng kahirapan ng mamayang Pilipino. Halimbawa, sa manggagawa, yung contractualisasyon, dapat durugin o ipagbawal ang manpower agency. Dapat direct hiring. Yung rice tarification law na nagpapahirap doon sa 11 million nating mga magsasaka, dapat yan i-repeal. Yung taxation, dapat ang itatax ay yung mga mayayaman at hindi yung mga mahihirap. Dapat alisin yung VAT at ang gawing taxation ay ilipat doon sa pagiging progressive yung taxation na sinasabi naman ng ating konstitusyon na dapat progressive. Kung sino kumikita, siyang i-tax. Kung malaki ang kita, malaki ang tax. Kung maliit ang kita, maliit ang tax. At kung walang kinikita, tulad ng mga pulubi, ay huwag i-tax, lalo na yung mga unemployed. Pero sa sistema natin ng pagbubuwis, yung VAT law at saka yung train law, kahit pulubi ka, pag bumili ka ng sardinas, bumili ka ng noodles, itatax ka ng gobyerno. Tapos sa kabilang banda, yung mga korporasyon, may corporate tax cut from 30 to 20%. May tax holiday. At binibigyan ng napakalaking lupain sa mga probinsya para gawing industrial center nila na walang pakialam ang gobyerno sa mga policy na gagawin nila doon. Kaya, yun ang aking gustong baguhin. Ang gusto kong baguhin ay tao muna. Tao muna, bago tubo. Mamayan, hindi yung iilang mga mayayaman. Kaya, yun ang gusto kong maging batas, maging patakaran, at maging gobyerno ng ating bansa. Tapusin natin yung elitistang paghahari sa ating bansa. Tapusin natin ang sabwatan ng mga trapo, ng dynasty, at ng mga malalaking korporasyon. Yan ang problema natin. Yung sabwatan ng mga political dynasty at ng malalaking korporasyon para sa pagyaman ng iilan sa ating bayan. Lamang po't maraming salamat.
Thank you very much, Carlo. For short translation only, because some foreign media in attendance via Zoom and actual, ang sabi ni Carlo de Guzman, he is presidential candidate from among the workers class, representing the interests and aspirations of the masses. And he said he hopes to break the cycle of oligarchic and elitist politics of the Philippines, which has been dominated by traditional elite families since the time of Aguinaldo, more than a century ago, and advocating progressive reforms. Thank you, Carlo de Guzman. Last but not the least, next is very important, another reformist leader who is giving the Philippines a refreshing choice in the presidential candidate. We have with us a presidential candidate who is former Undersecretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs, former presidential spokesperson of President Duterte, actually the first one. He was like the iceberg and the president was like the volcano during the early years of the Duterte administration. And also, if I'm not mistaken, he is only one of two evangelical Christians running for president. Only two evangelical Christians, diba? There's Manny Pacquiao and him. And if he wins the presidency, he would also be the second evangelical Christian to be president next to Fidel Ramos. Let us welcome Undersecretary Ernesto Abella for his opening statement.
Una-una, papasalamat po. No, thank you, Kaado. May napansin ako kay Kaado, no? Siya pala ay kakambal ni Al Pacino. No? Nanghimas pa no? But anyway, nipapasalamat po tayo sa oportunidad na makasalamuha at makapagbigay po tayo ng konting paliwanag patukol sa ating kandidatura. At tayo po ay tumatakbo dahil sa meron po tayong nakita sa patungkol sa ating patungkol sa ating patungkol sa Philippine society na una-una po napakalaki po ng agwat between agwat between the rich and the poor sa ating bayan po. For example, meron po tayo mga 23 to 26 million na tinugunang living below poverty level. Ang poverty level po sa ating sa sukat actually ay kung family of 5 or 6 kayo, dapat ang sinisweldo nyo at least a month is kung below po 12,000 ay ibig sabihin na below poverty level na kayo. Na ang isa pa po nakakabahala tungkol sa statistics na yan is the fact na meron po 12.5 million na katao na kasama po dyan sa 22 to 26 million na nakakaranas po ng gutom, regularly. So ito po yung ito po yung nagbibigay diin sa ating kandidatura na dapat maging patas ang ating lipunan. Dapat hindi lang ang legislatura at ang pamamahala, hindi lang sa kamay ng mga yung those who are in power or the 0.4%, pero dapat po may pantayan at magbalanse po ang kapangyarihan dito by encouraging the participation of civil society na dapat po sumali at maisali at lumahok, lalong-lalo na po sa pagsusupervise mga at least ang isang bagay doon ay to look after sa local government level ang po yung pag-supervise po ng for example mga bids and awards, mga legal tenders upang po matugunan ang isang napakalaki talagang ating hinaharap, which is yung corruption. Pangalawa po, ang maliban sa isang patas na lipunan ay mahalaga rin po isang pangalawang haligi po ng ating plataforma ay dapat yung gobyerno ay nararamdaman. Hindi lang po sa GDP ang sukat kaunlaran ng isang bayan. Ang isa pong matunay na sukat ay kung pwede ay talagang wala nang natutulog na gutom dito sa ating bayan. Kung pwede if we can lift up the 23 to 26 million people out of poverty, and that no more Filipino experiencing hunger regularly, dapat mawala na yan. At ang ating pong plano para matugunan yan ay gawin po natin na agrikultura ay gawin po natin siyang isang mega industry. Ano po yung sabihin na mega industry? Kasi po sa matagal ng panahon, agriculture has been neglected, and in fact it has been allowed to, I don't know if you call it benign neglect, but definitely it has been neglected to the point that it seems to be that the common term and the common mantra is that agriculture in the Philippines is not competitive. Of course, it's not competitive because it is neglected. Unlike, for example, in Vietnam or Thailand, where, for example, the farmers are heavily subsidized, our agriculture sector is being neglected, and that is, of course, because we're being made to fit into the global supply chain na kung saan tayo nagpo-provide ng mga resources, pero hindi naman tayo talaga naka-experiensya ng ating sariling pagdadagdag ng value. Tayo po, the Philippines is becoming a consumer society. We simply consume what others provide for us, and that needs to change. Dapat magbago yan. And so ang and basically that will change when we are able to do at least two things. Number one, dapat we need to be able to restore the trust of the people in the government, and we can do that if, for example, the government itself participates in the elimination of corruption by allowing, for example, the participation of civil society. And thirdly, of course, we would like to encourage a greater sense of love for the nation. Yung pagmamahal sa bayan, a sense of patriotism. At ito pong, this is the third leg of our platform, which is basically that we see that a nation, in order to flourish, in order to survive and thrive, needs to have its people have a deep love for its country. So balikan ko po, matatag ang pangatlong haligi is matatag na bayan. How will we do that? Two or three things, but I'd like just to dwell on one before I just make a comment on Kaado's statement. Number one po, gusto po natin i-encourage yung mga Pilipino, especially between ages 18 to 35, na lumahok po sila in what we call a National Volunteer Corps, na kung saan inikayat natin sila na tumulong sa pagbubuo ng bayan, nation building. Sumali sila sa community building, sumali sila sa mga academic reforms, sumali sila sa also sa protection of the environment, sumali sila sa ating for example, the planting of the mangrove coastlands, and of course yung ating mga the reforestation. So kumbaga, eto po, may tatlong bagay, but first and foremost, ang gusto po talaga natin mangyari ay mawala ang agwat, maisoli ang tiwala, at magkaroon ng pagmamahal sa bayan. Ang magiging resulta po niyan ay isang bayang makapurihan, mapayapa, at masayang bayan. Which leads me now to a comment that I'd like to make regarding the opening statement of Kaado, na unang-una, I've seen, for example, over the years, we've seen a bottom line. In the beginning, it was just increasing shareholders and bottom line. But now, I've begun to see that what is truly crucial, especially for nation building, is four bottom lines. Number one, the people's well-being. Number two, protection of the planet. Number three, ethical revenue. And number four, a purposive governance. Paano po yung what is the connection between these four statements, between these four bottom lines, and Kaado's statement? The connection is that we need to protect the people's welfare and well-being. So, yun po, I'd just like to leave it at that, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Ernesto Abella, for his comprehensive opening statement about his vision for the Philippines. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Later on, we'd like now to open the floor for questions. The first question texted to me here from Zoom, among the media in the Zoom. The President yesterday was in President Duterte vortex of war. Anong comment ninyo dito, the three panelists here? Anong comment ninyo? Sabi niya, Philippines should avoid vortex of war because there's a war now between Ukraine and Russia and conflict between NATO and Russia. And there's a chance, may chance daw na itong gera mag-spill over to Asia. I don't know if I'm correct. I read the news. President Duterte mentioned that it's possible in the future that might be a conflict between Taiwan province, which is part of China. Ano daw ang comment ninyo? I know you are all anti-war. We are. Do you agree with the statement? And anong kailangan gawin para mag-avoid tayo ng gera? Para hindi tayo masali sa gera? Any comment on this from the speakers? Si Ado, anong comment nyo? Short comment lang para marami tayong... let's try to make our comments short so we can have many questions. Thank you.
In the first place, one has to be familiar with the Chinese foreign policy before a statement like that could be qualified. The very principle of governance observed by our Chinese neighbor is that of building harmony, not only in the region, but for the rest of the world. So, if the perspective of China is such, with more emphasis on economic development, I do not see any invasion being made on Taiwan. I do not know where the President bases his premises or the premises that are fed to him by his lame duck cabinet. Because it appears to me that this is sort of the old thinking that if one side of the world is being destabilized, sooner enough it will go to the other side of the world. A conflict on one side definitely destabilizes the other side. But as to whether a war will come in, it will not because of any Chinese invasion. This is very far from what is the foreign policy, the win-win foreign policy of China. If there will be a war, it will not be because of China. It will be because of an American power that keeps on needling China to conflict. An American power that keeps on violating our economic zones and our sovereignty. It is the presence of a power that is 10,000 miles away but wanting to show that he is still relevant in these parts of the world, which I do not agree. So this vortex of war is not forthcoming in this part of the world because the protagonist or the antagonist will not be the one to start it.
Salamat. May follow-up question dito for all the panelists here. Sandali, from Manila Times journalist. Ang sabi ng Manila Times journalist, si Mr. Sandali, I will read the statement. Follow-up question for all the panelists here. From journalist Mr. Franco Jose Baronia of Manila Times. This is for Calyodi pala. For Calyodi. under your administration, what do you think should be the contribution of the Philippines to ASEAN community? I think si Yusek Abella can answer after Calyodi. Ano ang sa tingin niyo magiging contribution magandang contribution ng Pilipinas para sa ASEAN kung kayo ang naging Pangulo? Franco Jose Baronia, Manila Times.
Ang pinakamaganda ng pwede natin gawin na contribution para doon sa ASEAN ay yung malis natin dito yung threat, yung security threat sa buong ASEAN. At ang isang pranon, putulin natin yung ating relasyon doon sa Amerika. Yung lahat ng ating military at security relation na sinasabi nila, yung Mutual Defense Treaty, yung DFA, yung MLSA, yung EDCA, putulin na natin yan. At pati, alam ko, meron pang mga base militar yung US dito sa mga kampo ng mga Pilipinas, siguro mga 5 pa yata yan, 5. Alisin natin. Para nang sa ganun ay magkaroon ng peace of mind yung ASEAN. Kasi hanggat nandyan yan, ay magneto yan sa gera o sa security ng ating ASEAN. Then ideklara yung lahat ng yung teritoryo dito sa yung Yaman dito sa sabihin natin Southeast Asian Sea. Huwag nang South China Sea, Southeast Asian Sea, na parang isang common ground ng economic ng buong ASEAN. Na yung kung ano magkaroon ng tulungan sa pagdevelop at maging beneficial sa lahat ng 600 o 650 million na populasyon ng Southeast Asian nation. Then magtulong-tulong din, i-encourage natin yung ASEAN na through diplomacy, no? Na yung China ay huwag ituloy na yung pangangamkam ng mga kanya-kanyang halimbawa sa West Philippine Sea, sa North Malaysian Sea, sa East Vietnam Sea, at iba pang mga lugar. Itigil na yung panghimasok ng China. Irespeto yung kasunduan doon sa UNCLOS. Pero dapat, kasabay niyan, itulak din palayo yung China. Umalis ang US. Yung AUS, yung Quad, no? Japan, Australia, doon sa kanya mga ginagawang mga military exercise dito sa West Philippine Sea. I-transform natin into economic zone. I-demilitarize natin yung Southeast Asian Sea. Kasi may tingin ako na hindi talaga natin mapapalakas yung push sa China na umalis kung nandyan yung US at siyang regular na naglalakbay dyan yung kanyang mga fleets at tuloy-tuloy yung kanyang military exercise. Alam naman natin na merong trade war ang US at saka China at alam natin na yung US ay gustong i-maintain yung kanyang hegemony sa buong mundo at ang kanyang tinatarget ngayon ay yung binubuli niya yung China. Kaya tingin ko dalawang approach, yung pagpapalis sa China and at the same time palis sa US, i-demilitarize ang South China Sea ang Southeast Asian Sea at i-transform into ay economic zone ang lahat ng yan na beneficial sa lahat ng mamayan ng Southeast Asia. Yun ang pwede nating magawa and at the same time alam ko yung kaisahan ng Southeast Asia hinggil doon sa may mga initial na usapan tungkol sa pagiging nuclear free ng Southeast Asia ay itulak hanggang sa maging isang penal at mapatibay yung pagkakasundo ng Southeast Asia tungkol sa bagay na yan para nagkaroon ng kapayapaan at the same time yung development ng ASEAN para sa kapakanan ng buong mamayan. Yun ang ating gagawin.
Thank you very much, Calio. The short translation lang for our foreign media friends. What Calio de Guzman just said in reply to Manila Times question, he is advocating for the whole Southeast Asian region to be demilitarized and to be nuclear free. To us, he said that the Philippine contribution to ASEAN community peace and progress is to promote neutrality of ASEAN and to remove the 3 U.S. military agreements and 5 military bases in the Philippines to make the ASEAN region truly independent, non-aligned, and sabi niya, free from military presence of foreign troops. And with that, there's a chance to request ask China to get out also of the disputed areas. So he is advocating, I think, if I'm correct, gusto niya mangyari yun, gusto mangyari sa Ukraine na wag magsali sa any superpower para hindi magkaroon ng gulo sa kanila. So that's a very good, that's a short translation of what he said. We'd like to invite Undersecretary Abella, formerly with the Department of Foreign Affairs, on your views naman on what the Philippines can contribute to Southeast Asia or ASEAN community from Manila Times.
All right, hello, thank you for the question. First and foremost, ASEAN is all about. Number one, ASEAN is really meant to accelerate economic growth, in the area, in the region. Economic growth, social progress, and cultural understanding. So, and then of course, peace and regional peace and stability comes second. But number one is really economic growth. So, if there's anything at all that the Philippines can really can contribute, it is that number one, it should strengthen itself economically. Domestically, and make sure that in spite of all the challenges of us being included, for example, in the global supply chain, we need to be able to strengthen people's well-being comes first. No, not just a blind counting of GDP, but that first and foremost, nobody should be going to bed hungry. Nobody should be, and then technically that everybody, for example, we need to be able to process. For example, also we need to have food security and food sustainability. If we do this, then we can actually meaningfully participate in the cultural life of the ASEAN. It's not just because that is the first and foremost purpose, which is economic growth. And if we're not able to contribute meaningfully, it will be useless for us to become. We'll just be parang salimpusa lang tayo sa lugar na yan. Salamat po.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Ernesto Abella. There's a question here from our Zoom audience. There's a leader here of business community, Mr. Seferino Benedicto. He has a question para kay Calyodi. Ano ang pagkaiba ninyo kay Norberto na sabi niya nanggaling din siya sa hanay ng manggagawa at naging union organizer din noon? Tanong ito galing kay Seferino Benedicto, kung di ako nagkakamali, originally from Cebu, para kay Calyodi de Guzman.
Talagang manggagawa. Ako ay 12 years na factory worker. At mula din sa aking pagiging manggagawa, ay doon ako namulat na maglingkod sa mga mula 1981 hanggang 80 trabaho para mabuhay. Yan ang sinasabi kong labor. Kasi may mga tao na tayo dito sa Pilipinas na hindi kailangan magtrabaho pero mabubuhay at ang buhay nila napakasarap. Ako mga manggagawa na sinasabi kong obligado magtrabaho para mabuhay dahil sila bibili ka ng yaman, sila ang para silang development, pero ang inaapi. Sila ang nagiging busabos ng ating lipunan. At ako'y patuloy na titindig at maglilingkod sa interes ng mga manggagawa at hindi sa interes ng mga malaking negosyo. yun siguro ang aking masasabi sa sarili ko, kayo mo mag-differentiate sa aming dalawa.
Thank you. We have to do the book ceremony pala kasi may appointment si is 2:30. Pwede ba tayong magbigay ng libro kay dalawang libro kay may picture taking dapat picture iaabot ni Ado kay Leody, isang libro naman, dalawang libro bibigay kay Yusek Ernesto Abella. Or sabay na dapat. Isang kamay, dalawa para may magandang picture. Sige. Kasi may appointment si Kali. Yes, picture mo na. May CNN question mo na. Sige. Pero picture mo na. Picture mo na.
Okay.
Yes.
Ayun, thank you. Salamat. Basahin ko to, sigurado. Babalikan kita at titignan ko sa iyo. Basa ko.
Si Leody ay well-read na leader, kaya napakagaling magsalita. Of course, si Yusek, very well-read, yes. And then, the presentation of book kay Undersecretary Abella. And then, quick questions, quick answers. Baka pwede if you, ayan. Philippines has a question. Pwedeng microphone, paki-abot, may mag-assist. Paki-assist lang, please. Short, quick answers lang para hindi makaalis si Leody.
Hi, good afternoon po. This question is for Leody po and Sir Ernesto Abella. Sir, recently po kasi yung Russian ambassador to the Philippines praised itong si President Duterte dahil sa kanyang neutral stance sa Russia and Ukraine war. So if ever na kayo man yung maluklok sa presto, would you take a neutral stance? Ano po yung dito sa gera between Ukraine and Russia? Thank you.
Thank you, CNN.
Hello. Hindi ko gagayanin. Yung posisyon ni Duterte. Pinapatay yung mga Ukraine umatras. Tulad na niyang pilitin na sumapi sa NATO. Pangatlong kasabay ng aking panawagan ay doon sa Pangulo ng Ukraine. Dapat mag-stand siyang neutral. Umalis na sa Russia, mag-independent siya. Tumanig sa NATO at saka sa US. Kasi NATO, kalaban ng Russia, yung US, ay nasa border lang sila. Nasa border. Kaya yun ang aking magiging panawagan at hindi tindig na parang hayaan na lamang na ipagpapatayin yung mga Ukrainian people. Hindi ako papayag doon. Manawagan ako ng pag-atras ng Russia, manawagan ako ng pagdistansya ng US at saka ng NATO sa Ukraine, at kasabay na manawagan ako sa gobyerno ng Ukraine na mag-neutral siya, mag-non-align, mag-independent, para na sa ganun maprotektado yung kanyang mamayan.
Thank you, Leody Guzman. Yusek Abella.
Malinaw naman yata ang posisyon ng Pilipinas patungkol sa nagpadala tayo, nag-align tayo sa State NGA, UN General Assembly, na kinukondemnar natin ang attacks against Ukraine. Sinabi doon, in-address kung sino talaga yung
including the discovery of over 30 biolabs in Ukraine. What is your position about all these biolabs of the US, including 30 in Ukraine? Short answer lang please para may paalis na si Leody. Ay, microphone dyan ha.
Una, hindi posibleng pasukin ng US yan kasi karakter niya yan karakter niyan. Ngayon, first time ko narinig, kung totoo yan, ay talagang dapat ipaimbestigahan yung bagay na yan at magkaroon ng konkretong mga detalye, bakit at sa anong purpose ginagawa yan. Kasi kung ito for biological warfare, hindi pwede yan. Hindi pwede. Kaya yun ang aking tindig yan.
Thank you very much. Short answer from Yusek Abella.
kaya malinaw na kailangan talaga independent yung ating foreign policy para makita natin That's the first time also I hear about that. Pero dapat malinaw na malinaw din sa atin ang purpose natin na una-una isang purpose. What is the purpose of a state? It is number one to survive and number two to thrive. So dapat pangalagaan natin ating tao and to make sure na hindi tayo masasabit sa kung ano na pangyayari.
Thank you. Maybe last question.
Pay natin kay Calio, sabi natin pa-investigahan yung mga biolabs na yan. Saan ho natin idudulog yung investigation? United Nations? Saan po?
Pwede tayo magbuo ng isang independent body na kasi yung influensya ng US sa maraming global institution ay napakalaki. Kaya pwede natin magbuo ng isang independent body na composed ng mga representative ng mga bansa ang mag-imbestiga. Para sa ganon, fair. Kasi sa pagkakaalam ko, mga international body na binubuo ay may sinasandalan. Kung hindi man US yan, may iba pang sinasandalan. Kaya isang independent, sa ganon, kapakanan ng buong sangkatauhan ang mananaig na interest kung bakit gagawin. At hindi interest ng US, interest ng Russia, China, unang sinumang bansa na mayroong gustong i-push na interest sa kanyang para yung hegemonya niya ay manatili.
Thank you. Maybe one last question. May nag-text dito. What is your comment? Short lang ho, kung pwede, kasi paalis na si Calio and si Yusek naman will stay. What is your comment about the Balikatan 2022 exercises happening now, which is supposedly the largest joint military exercise of the U.S. force? The timing of it now, the whole world is in.
Ang may pahayag na ako dyan, natanong na sa akin yan at hindi sang-ayon dahil sa sitwasyon ngayon na merong Ukraine na may nag-aalala ng isang world war, merong West Philippine Sea dyan sa mga balikatan na yan. Dapat nang matigil yan.
Yes, sorry. I will translate very. Yes, I will translate very short. Yes, very good. Miss Dog said I should translate. What Calio de Guzman just said. The joint military exercise is not welcome by him. It's not very good for the region of Asia, especially during this time when the world is in military warfare, chaos. We have a lot of dangers. He said before also in previous statement that he gave that it is a provocative exercise. Unnecessary. He is not against the joint military exercises of the Philippines and the U.S. And with any other country in this ASEAN region. For Yusek Abella, short answer.
Technically, ang isang bagay talaga na dapat ang tabayanan natin, hindi tayo madawit into a proxy war. That we become in a proxy war. Tandaan natin na gano'n na kadalasan. So ang tabayanan natin na hindi tayo yun lang big forces. Yun po, mahalaga sa akin yan. Mahalaga sa atin yan.
Short answer. Secretary Abella, Philippines should avoid becoming a proxy of any superpower in any of their rivalries. And we should never be in a dangerous position of being a pawn of any of the superpowers, neither of them. He said earlier, uphold true independent foreign policy that is pro-Philippines. Thank you. Coyote has to leave. Meron ba kayong last statement? Bago kayo umalis? Okay na. Kaya may picture with the Pandesal. Para na matuwa yung panadero namin. Sorry. Picture. Tayo na kayo picture with Coyote na Pandesal. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you once again to the courageous nationalist Coyote de Guzman. Walang pahinga sa trabaho. Thank you, Coyote, and all your efforts. We'll continue. Si Ato Paglinawan naman has some answers to the question. Please, short answers lang kasi maraming questions tayo. Ang mga tanong kanina is the biolab. What is your stand on the biolab? Nasabi niyo na kanina. Pero maybe on the Balikatan. Are you in favor? Are you against it? And why? Short lang ho kung pwede para may ibang question.
Well, my favorite author said that this is no longer the time for military alliances. but this is now the time for just military cooperation. And so if we just adopt a position of neutrality, we will avoid the accident of falling as a proxy, as Ernie has been saying. And at the same time, a cannon fodder, as Kalyodi has also shared with us. I think it's best that we define our foreign policy from the viewpoint of economics and for the best benefit of our people, not to please any superpower, whether descending or ascending. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a question here related. There's a question here. Thank you for the short comments. There's a question here, follow-up questions. Do you see the situation of as a perfect example of a country mistakenly becoming a pawn of aligning itself with instead of becoming Finland? Do you think example of what we should di ba, in the Europe region, there's the US on one side led by with NATO military alliance, and on the other side there's Russia. Is it a lesson for the Philippines? That's a question. The Ukraine situation, is it a lesson to Philippines and ASEAN? We should not allow the Ukrainization of our region. Any comment on this? Do we have lessons from Ukraine? Kasi some politicians and other people are saying we should learn from Ukraine. Actually, we should learn from the mistake of...
It's not from Ukraine that we should learn. It's from Russia. Because Russia has defined specifically the threats to its own sovereignty. That NATO since 2014 and the US have been collaborating in an encirclement. Russia also has been on what it in Ukraine, and if this will just be heard by President Zelensky, there will be no more problem. All he prominently is, number one, the denazification of Ukraine, and number two, recognition of Crimea and the Donbas region as independent states. That is all. It is nothing. That is why it's not accelerating. It's not exacerbating the violence of war in Ukraine. It knows exactly what it wants and exactly what to position itself. It is from that we should learn, not from Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Barbara Kamuning, thank you sa tanong yun. Di ko nahabol kasi may schedule sa Kalyodi. Next time, thank you Miss Barbara Kamuning for your question. Ang question niya was how the socialist movement in the Philippines could grow through the electoral struggle and everything. Thank you. From Gulf News siya. Maybe we'd like to request maybe a few more last questions from our media friends in the Zoom or Actual.
Can I make a rejoinder?
Yes.
On this side of the world, the foreign policy of China is very clear. We should learn also from China. That's why I do not see any invasion of Taiwan. Why will you invade your own territory? I mean, this is crazy. This is language coming from the dictionary of the Americans. They want us to fall into the rule-based definitions, which most likely would be a violent confrontation with countries, because all they want is war. From 20 years, the United States spent almost $6 to $7 trillion just for war, the latest of which was in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much. May nagtanong dito, si Undersecretary Abella daw looks and sounds very diplomatic in all your talks and debates. And have you ever imagined yourself becoming a future diplomat? Would you want to become a Foreign Affairs Secretary in the future, or a UN Secretary General head or something? You seem to be cut out now to be that kind of person. What is your comment about you seem to be like a natural diplomat?
So, this election period.
I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Mao Giasamonte, very distinguished analyst. And yes, we'd like to invite before we end the whole session, Mr. Herman Laurel, President of PhilBricks Strategic Studies, to read his statement. He helped organize this book launching today. Mr. Kamentong Laurel.
Actually, next week meron ding book launch.
Yes, next week we will have a book launching. We'll have more time to prepare. This was a little bit rushed kasi may schedule tayo. Next week is Mao Giasamonte. We'll announce the details. Thank you.
Okay. Dinig ba ito? Okay. So, napapag-usapan na natin itong mga proxy wars, Ukraine. Napansin ko lang nung nakaraang mga araw, si Carpio may statement na lumabas sa Inquirer, and it is in the paper that I distributed. I still have some copies for those who may want a copy. At dito sa report ng Inquirer dated March 31, ito po ang headline. Amid sea dispute with China, Carpio sees need to preposition U.S. weapons to repulse invasion. So, sinasabi ni Carpio na tayo ay kumuha ng mga missiles sa Estados Unidos. Baka gusto niyang isama po yung nuclear weapons, at ilagay dito sa Pilipinas pang depensa daw sa invasion ng China. But this is why I call this request or demand of Carpio as Ukrainization of the Philippines. Nais niyang maging Ukraine ang Pilipinas dito sa Asia. And kasabay po nito, itong 28, nagsimula po yung balikatan exercise, advertised or reported as the largest ever military exercise between the U.S. Armed Forces and the Philippines Armed Forces. At alam po ninyo saan pa nilagay? Sa probinsya ng Cagayan. At ngayon may mga larawan na lumalabas na beach landing, beach offensives. Ano kaya ang layunin nun? Hindi kaya, well, this is what I explain here. It is very clear, it is a preparation for an invasion of Fuga Island, Babuyan Island, as stepping stones to Taiwan. And yun din ang sinabi po ni Governor Mamba ng Cagayan Province. And I quote Mamba here also in my very short 2-page paper. Sabi niya, ayaw niya yung balikatan exercise na yan, except if it is just civic action, medical mission ng Philippine and U.S. military doon sa probinsya niya at doon sa region niya, Cagayan Valley. At nung natanong siya, why the U.S. and the Philippine forces wants to stage military live fire drill in Cagayan, ang sagot ni Mamba, because Taiwan is a powder keg. Bakit tayo nakikihalo sa issue ng Taiwan? And bakit tayo tinutulak nitong Estados Unidos na makipag-isa sa kanila sa mga military exercises doon patungo sa Taiwan? Hindi kaya, and sa akin malinaw po yun, na nais din isubo ang Pilipinas in the same manner na kanilang sinubo ang Ukraine sa gera. And kung papayag tayo sa mga tulad nitong mga American boys na sila Carpio, kasalanan na natin. Kaya po ang aking pamagat dito sa paper ko, fight the Ukrainization of the Philippines. And this of course has been going on for 10 years. 10 taon na po ito na kanilang ginagatungan ang consciousness ng Pilipino na magalit sa China. Samantalang ang totoo, ang China pilit naman nagpapakita ng magandang loob, pakipagtulungan sa Pilipinas, at mabuti naman naka-eksena po si Presidente Duterte at napigilan po itong proseso na sinimulan many decades ago, at pinaigting po itong away, itong tensyon na to ng dating Pangulong Noynoy Aquino.
Translate short
Yeah.
translation.
In English?
In English, I'll translate.
Just read the paper
Yes,
from
yes.
English.
Is it possible for you to email also? There are people sending me text.
will.
Is it possible to email?
The email addresses.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So yun lang po ang mensahe natin.
Yes. They're asking, so can I
In the
translate?
internet, okay.
Can you make a short translation?
Okay, I will read parts of the paper, position
English.
paper I presented here. Fight the Ukrainization of the Philippines, April 1st, 2022. This is not an April Fool's Day joke or prank. The American boys in the Philippines want to see our country, our cities, our people destroyed, as we are seeing Ukraine being devastated in the Ukraine war today, for the benefit of the United States of America. Turn to the Philippine Daily Inquirer and read the report entitled, quote, "Amid sea dispute with China, Carpio sees need to pre-position U.S. weapons to repulse invasion by China." Of course, that is how crazy these American boys are. Carpio blabbers about invasion by China when it is the U.S. and its American boys that have invaded and occupied the Philippines through over 100 years of colonialism and neo-colonialism, killing hundreds of thousands of Filipinos, exploiting and suppressing the growth of its economy, the Philippine economy. So there is a photo here of that headline.
There's a follow-up question here for Mr. Mentong Laurel.
Yes.
There's a question to what you just said. Somebody texted here, Carpio, De Rosario, and the other pro-American advocates have been criticizing the president for the past 6 years endlessly on the front pages, including Secretary Abella was still a spokesperson. They were attacking the president non-stop on the China-friendly and Russia-friendly and independent foreign policy non-stop.
Yes.
Including the 3 years ago, the election. But they've been repudiated in the elections, every election, like 6 years ago,
Yeah.
2 years ago, and even now based on all the survey trends. Do you think this is the voters, because like Secretary Abella is also a nationalist, Calyobi is a nationalist, the president is a nationalist, even the front runner is a clear nationalist in the foreign policy sense. Do you think this advocacy of theirs is unpopular and actually unpopular with the electorate?
Would Ernie like to contribute
Yes, because
to the discussion?
they keep using this as their front and center electoral issue. Even in the election 3 years ago, they even had all the opposition candidates went to the beach saying they will sail there, but they failed in the election. Do you think this trying to use this foreign policy, independent policy as has been a failure? Because the president is unprecedented in popularity up to now, President Duterte. And everybody clearly knows he is nationalist, not pro any superpower.
So how's the question? What is the
The
question?
question is, do you think the electorate and the general public do not like this type of hitching to a superpower type policy that some of these elitist people want now? That's the question. So does that mean that the country in general is in favor of the independent foreign policy
I
of
think
the country?
I will come in and then we'll give it to Ernie.
Can you comment?
I'll comment first and I'll go to
Yes.
Ernie. I think it's very clear, even the front runner in the election is an affirmation of the independent foreign policy. In fact, not just in the independent foreign policy, but a clear engagement with the enemies of the United States, meaning China and Russia. This is reflected in the over 80% approval rating of the President Duterte. Ernie, you
The
can
reason they asked you
sure.
mention the name Carpio, and there only one issue, number one, always is,
Anti-China, that's always the issue.
what is your comment, the president's success?
Obviously, the people trust the president's wisdom. You know, they perceive it as that. And it's also very important, for example, not just to have a vision for the six years, but for where we really want to bring the nation. Now, when do we want to bring the Philippines? You know, more than that, that's why I keep talking about a Siglo Filipino, or Philippine century. Menton talked about the Asian century. Well, I'm being country specific. I believe we need to be able to articulate for ourselves and to see that it's possible for us to actually generate the roadmap para kung saan tayo patutungo. And ano bang klaseng bayan ang gusto talaga natin? If we go by the people's approval of Duterte, I believe there are several things. Number one, I believe the people are tired of being at the bottom of the pyramid. They're being bottom of the pyramid na kung saan may hierarchy at nakikita nila sarili na sa baba at talagang hindi sila makakausap pataas. So pangalawa, ang unang-una, I think one reason why this talks about itong kay, what's his name, itong their approval of the president, talks about not just the presidency, but about their own desire for the nation and for themselves. Na dapat may magandang mangyari sa Pilipinas at nakikita nila kay President Duterte na pwede mangyari yun. And yun din ang hinahanap nila ngayon. Not just a vision for the next 6 years, but kung saan natin gusto dalhin ng Pilipinas. At sa nakikita ko, pwede mangyari na isang makatarungang bayan, isang makatarungang Pilipinas. Isang bayan na bagay sa Pilipino at mga Pilipinong nararapat sa Pilipinas.
Ka-Ernie and Bunson, let me just continue para mabuo natin. So, remember, hinihingi ni Scarpio na magposisyon ng weapons ng Estados Unidos dito, ibig sabihin missiles. So, anong kahulugan yan? This is what I wrote. No? Prepositioned weapons and foreign military forces are magnets for hypersonic missiles and nuclear weapons retaliation. Magiging target tayo ng mga missiles ng mga kalaban ng Estados Unidos. As we see in Ukraine today. And the U.S. ally, our U.S. ally, will fight to the last drop of blood of the last Ukrainian doon sa Ukraine and the last Filipino in the Philippines. Not American blood nor life. China never touched any of the islands of the Philippines occupied since the 1970s, claimed by Marcos. It is Vietnam that grabbed away Phuket Island in 1975. That was already occupied by Philippine Marines. Carpio, aside from being Amboy, is married to a Vietnamese, maybe a Matahari. The Americans demolished the city of Manila in the Second World War, the pearl of the Orient Seas. Unwilling to face street-to-street fighting with the Japanese, they carpet cannoned and bombed Manila, killing 250,000 Filipinos. Much more than the Japanese could have killed in the last-minute killing spree of the Japanese. Many Filipinos, for convenience, are in government today to do the bidding of the Americans. Like the American citizen Grace Poe, Filipino for convenience, grandstanding as a patriot and sensationalizing her call to investigate the contrived close encounter of the Philippine Coast Guard and Chinese Coast Guard ships. Or green card holder Albert de Rosario blabbering about China, flouting of international law. The incident at the Scarborough Shoals is deliberately over-dramatized by some in the Philippine mainstream media for the lucre it gets from the new $500 million for anti-China propaganda approved by the U.S. Congress at the expense of the Filipino nation's strategic security and welfare. The Inquirer tagged Manuel Mamba as pro-China for his concern for Cagayan province constituents and the impact of the hostile Balikatan live-fire U.S.-Philippine military drill. It could damage economic cooperation with Chinese investors, Mamba said, which is vital to his economic projects. The Balikatan is targeting the invasion of Taiwan through Fuga and Babuyan Islands. The Amboys clearly have no consciences baiting war to come to the Philippines to save America from facing the enemy themselves. So we have to fight, no? My call is, let's fight the Ukrainization of the Philippines. Yun lang po. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's Mr. Herman Laurel, President of Philbricks Strategic Studies, also geopolitics expert and analyst. Thank you. We have time for closing statement from our panelists, including Mr. Laurel. Before that, may tanong pa dito kay Secretary Ernesto Abella. Can you please assess the presidency of your good friend, former boss, President Rodrigo Duterte, 6 years, which is about to finish now? He is record high in popularity compared to all the previous presidents in modern history. Can you assess the success secrets niya? Why is he so popular up to now despite the unprecedented global pandemic? 2 years, joblessness is high. Because of that, we have all these headaches in the country. Why do the people still trust and love him, and why is he still successful? Please explain to us. And last, maybe also what you want to learn from him, or as a leader, as a next president.
First and foremost, I think what he has done is more than just the economic successes, for example, the building of the infrastructures, no? Ang isang malaking bagay talaga is he has touched a nerve in the Filipino psyche. You know, parang for the first time, nagkaroon ng breakthrough na kung saan hindi elitista yung nasa taas at nararamdaman nila na somebody in power, nararamdaman na tao na somebody in power actually cares for them. You know, yung malasakit. You know, ibang-iba, like for example, you know, hanggang ngayon, when you go to social media, nababasa mo, there's still some bloggers, some people who post. Grabe the way they adulate him. Pero to be fair to him, it is, you know, for example, yung mga challenges na hinaharap natin, hindi naman niya ginawa yon. For example, katulad ng pandemya, hindi naman kanya yan, no? Ukraine, hindi naman kanya yan. Pero the way he's mobilized the people, he continues to be able to strengthen somehow a sense. You know, in a sense, siguro medyo lumapit na talaga sa, but a sense of being Filipino, a sense of being, you know, most of his supporters actually think they're really nationalists. And so for that, you have to give him credit. I believe one reason why he has, ang layo talaga, ang laki talaga ng kanyang hawak sa Philippine imagination is because of the fact that it has been genuine. Of course, people say this is a tactic of certain, you know, certain strongman perspectives o ganon. Pero actually, it's not a genius. It's just the fact that he actually has a genuine connect with people. One example, I think, is the way he picked up Pierre Renado nung nalaglag si Pierre Renado sa kanal. I think it was in Taba. You know, he just helped. And so there you go. Meron siyang genuine connect sa tao. And I believe that is such an amazing thing. But if there's anything at all worth emulating about him, it is, for example, it is his, you know, his stated and perceived and verifiable love for the nation. Thank you.
Why was your working relationship with him very smooth when you don't have the same personalities? Parang siya, parang rough and parang fearless, parang warrior. Kayo naman parang intellectual, cerebral, cool. Para ba kayong, is that what they say, opposites attract each other, or you gel, or you're, how was your working relationship with him?
It was not ideology, no, but it was, I believe, just like in a Venn diagram, there is a place where they actually converge. You know, it may be totally different, I may be the total opposite, but at a certain stage, we both shared, I believe, ako personally, from where I'm coming from, we share a love for the nation. Yung pagmamahal sa bayan. And to the point na, you know, kumbaga, unahin muna natin ang unahin natin ang tao, unahin natin ang Pilipinas bago ang sarili. And doon siya nagagaling at doon din ako nagagaling. Magkaiba man kami ng pamaraan, pero pareho kami ng hinaharap. Parehong gusto namin na umusad ang bayan at umusad ang bayan at makamit natin ang bayan na talagang gusto natin nararapat sa Pilipino.
Thank you very much, Yusek Ernesto Abella. Maybe we had time for closing statements from everyone because we wish to hear everyone talk about.
Ako daw muna, binigay sa
Yes,
kami ko.
so we will do it geographically.
Well,
from the right,
from the-
Herman Laurel.
Yeah, from the east to the west.
Yes. Sun rises in the east.
Alalahanin natin at tayo yung nagtipon-tipon itong araw na ito dito sa in-person meeting and of course social media. Dahil sa dalawang aklat na sinulat, pagmamalasakit ng ating manunulat na si Kaado Paglinawan, isa tungkol sa South China Sea issue na ang pamagat ay a problem for every solution. Madali naman solusyon sa South China Sea, pero ginagawang problema ng Amerika, arbitration panel at ng mga American boys. Ang solusyon halimbawa ay yung sinabi ni Calyodi, joint projects, no? Meron na tayo sa Reed Bank, ano yung joint project? 60-40 joint oil exploration and development, 60% for the Philippines. So yan, ganyan. Madali ayuhin yan with China. Dahil sa China ay negosyo lang. Pareho tayong kumita, okay. Dahil number 2, yung pangalawang libro niya ay yung no vaccine for a virus called racism. Dalawang issue yun. Yung virus at yung racism. Alam po ninyo, kahapon lang ata, nung makalawa, ang Philippine Consulate sa Estados Unidos nagprotesta sa Amerika dahil sa tuloy-tuloy at dumadaming mga pang-aabuso ng mga Pilipino, ng mga puti at mga Amerikano in general. Hindi natin napapag-usapan ito. This is a real problem for us Asians, no? Yung racism. Tapos yung racism, pinasukan pa ng racism, yung virus. No? Na sinabi ni Trump, kala niya nakakatawa, Kung flu. Anong sabi niya? Kung flu. Para sa politika nila sa Estados Unidos. But anyway, that shows you how callous Western civilization is. So, my final point is, si Duterte kaya popular yan, napapanahon siya sa kasaysayan ng sangkatauhan in history. He came at the right time when Asia, ang Asia po ay namumulat na at bumabangon na. Hindi lang Pilipinas, mabuti nakakasabay ang Pilipinas yan. Yan ang pinipigilan ng mga Calpio, Albert de Rosario, Batong Bakal, et al. Pinipigilan nila yan. Pero hindi po mapipigil dahil talagang nandiyan na po yung paggising at bukang liwayway ng Asia at ng Pilipinas.
Thank you very much. Bukang liwayway is sunrise of Asia. Naging magaling mag-Tagalog. Next, we'd like to invite, of course, the articulate book author and intellectual activist, Kaado Paglinawan, for his closing statement. And congratulations for your 2 new books.
Well, writing a dedication for some friends, I said, the West complicates, the East simplifies. Let us not define other countries by what they say, but what they do. Russia has defined its objectives in Ukraine. China has defined its position on Taiwan. Let us not make the Americans define to us the Russians and the Chinese. It's as simple as that. The President of the Philippines also is the chief architect of foreign policy. The buck stops there. But sometime in transit, something gets lost. instance, in the code of conduct, it is not neutrality that Teddy Boy Locsin virtually was on the verge of sabotaging the code of conduct by his own admission. Because of me, the code of conduct, he said, was something like a thing of the past. My God! And then his vote in the United Nations was in favor of the condemnation of Russia. The President and the Secretary of Defense says neutrality. He says a different thing. And our ambassador to the United States also says another thing. Teddy Boy and James Romualdez, I question their positions because they are not consistent with what the President says. Now, how they play this in the media, it's all up to you. But I say that the truth will always set us free. COVID-19 did not start in Wuhan, China, nor did it start in any part of China. It was brought there by anthropologists, human-to-human transmission. And I have proven this not from my own words, but from international media accounts and positions of medical and scientific journals. Number two, I further proved it from the words of the Director General of the Center for Disease Control of the U.S. itself being interrogated by a U.S. congressman in a formal hearing where he swore oath. Now, that is how I define things. I set my premises first, I make my sources known, and I make a conclusion. Other people in this country would like to reinvent Duterte. Duterte is not the president of 30% of this country, we know that. And 30% of this country is divided into four. 70% has an independent political understanding of what's going on. So let us be more sensitive to the facts on the ground. Let us not editorialize news. Let us not say, for instance, that some people have utang this much when the Supreme Court says only this much. I mean, we have a foreign associate justice of the Supreme Court that is on the loose. He's a loose cannon. And yet media always quotes this man. This man promotes dangerous thinking that is inimical to our national interest. Our national interest should only be guided by what's good for the Filipino people as a whole. And that's where we can all perhaps say that we will all be united behind whoever is the next president of the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Ka Ado Paglinawan, book author of 2 books. Later on, you will announce where people could buy via Facebook or by your phone numbers. Next, last but not the least, the distinguished former diplomat and former presidential spokesperson and now very eloquent, enlightened presidential candidate, Ernesto Abella.
I'd just like to underline a statement you made earlier that this is not the time for military cooperation, but for military alliances, but economic cooperation. I applaud that, and I'd just like to say that this is, I believe it's a great example of out of the box thinking. Well, not just out of the box thinking, but also a certain perception, especially during times that are especially tricky when we really have to pursue a foreign policy line. So I'd like to hear more from you. We look forward to more books. More books. And all power, best regards to you. Cheers.
Thank you very much again. Very outstanding leader and very respected, incorruptible Ernesto Abella. A good Christian also, not only a good leader. Thank you very much again, Mr. Herman Laurel. And of course, congratulations to Ado Paglinawan, who just now promised more books. You just compile your favorite analysis and columns for another book. Thank you very much again to everyone, and also earlier to Carl Yodi de Guzman, who had to leave earlier for an interview. Once again, thank you for joining book launching here at Pandesal Forum at Kamuning Bakery Cafe. And may picture tayo with Pandesal. Okay na ba? Picture? Dito? Yes. Yes, officially the Pandesal Forum is finished. Now we just have photo op. Thank you very much for joining this book launching. Thank you very much. We'll have another book launching next week from Mr. Mao Gia Samonte. We'll prepare and announce the details. Thank you very much.